State your name for the record. The man in tattered boots and a frayed coat raised his eyes from the defense table. There was no tremor in his demeanor, no hesitation in his posture. He simply uttered two words deliberately. The judge glanced at the name on the document, then carefully set her pen down and rose to her feet. Before a courtroom frozen in silence, she departed without uttering another syllable. If that sent shivers down your spine, write honor for the unsung heroes who never needed to raise their voices to leave their mark on history. Monday sessions in Judge Victoria Marquez's courtroom followed a predictable pattern. A line of weekend detainees, trivial infractions, and minor violations that demanded considerable patience. The artificial lighting buzzed overhead, casting an unflattering glow across every face. The courtroom wasn't physically cold. In fact, the heating system functioned too efficiently. Yet a certain chill permeated the atmosphere. The systematic processing of human existence, file numbers replacing personal narratives. Next case, the clerk announced, organizing documents with practiced efficiency. Case 247B. Several people turned their heads as the bailiff called out the name, though most remained focused on their devices or whispered conversations. The regulars, defense attorneys, prosecutors, stenographers, barely glanced up. Just another anonymous face, another time slot in the day's schedule. Yet something about this particular man caused the bailiff to pause as he approached. Perhaps it was the mismatched layers of clothing, despite the overheated room. Perhaps it was the faraway expression in eyes that appeared to be observing something entirely different, something not present within these walls. He moved forward unhurriedly, not from reluctance, but with the measured steps of someone who had discovered that haste never altered outcomes. His boots were deteriorated at the edges, their laces substituted with what resembled twisted plastic shopping bag handles. A beard, predominantly silver rather than brown, covered much of his face. His hands, when they emerged from the sleeves of his coat, were rough and weathered. His scent was of rainfall and concrete and nights spent beneath open skies. Not the sharp tang of liquor that often accompanied Monday morning defendants, but the earthier aroma of someone who slept under stars rather than roofs. "Please take your seat," directed the bailiff, indicating the defense table. The man acknowledged with a single nod and sat, his movements careful and purposeful. No excessive energy, no superfluous gestures. Judge Marquez examined the file. It contained less than most, just a lone intake form with handwritten observations. No identification had been provided, no background verification completed, merely a name inscribed on the line in handwriting that seemed inconsistent with the man's appearance. Too methodical, too disciplined. "Charges are unauthorized camping in a municipal area," she read aloud without looking up. "Third citation within this year." The public defender assigned to the morning cases stepped forward. Inexperienced, recently qualified, overwhelmed by a caseload that allowed only minutes for each client. "Your Honor," he began, "my client has declined accommodation in available shelters. He's minimally communicative. We suspect military background based on a tattoo observed during processing, though he hasn't verified this." Judge Marquez exhaled softly, the sound of someone pacing through a marathon of minor infractions. She'd encountered numerous individuals like him before, veterans unable to reintegrate, who found enclosed spaces confining after years of heightened vigilance, who preferred visible dangers to those lurking in crowded environments. "Let's proceed," she said, pen positioned above the form. "Sir, please state your name for the record." The courtroom maintained its quiet background of activity. A prosecutor organized documents. A court officer checked the time. The stenographer's fingers hovered above her machine, waiting. For the first time since entering, the man lifted his gaze. His eyes were blue, remarkably vivid against the sun-weathered brown of his skin. Not the empty stare of someone lost to substance abuse or mental illness, but clear and attentive, present in a way that suddenly seemed incongruous with his physical condition. He looked directly at Judge Marquez, his gaze steady. There was no defiance in it, no challenge, just a strange, quiet dignity that seemed to straighten his posture even as he remained seated. Then he spoke, his voice low but projecting easily throughout the courtroom. "Thomas Blackwell." Just two words pronounced slowly, deliberately, as if each syllable carried significance. The room showed no reaction. Names were merely procedural necessities, data elements for documentation. But Judge Victoria Marquez momentarily stopped breathing. Her pen, which had been moving to record the name, froze against the paper. She reached for the file again, her hands suddenly uncertain. The bailiff noticed. He'd worked alongside her for 7 years and had never witnessed her hesitate. The handwriting on the intake form matched the name just spoken. Thomas Blackwell. Not an unusual name, but not exceedingly common either. Yet Judge Marquez stared at it as if it had been written in flame rather than blue ballpoint ink. Her expression changed, color draining from her face, as if confronted by a specter materializing through her courtroom walls. Because in a sense, she had been. 15 years earlier, Victoria Marquez hadn't been a judge. She'd been a young legal assistant assigned to a federal judge overseeing a classified military tribunal. A case so sensitive that armed personnel had guarded every entrance. A case where testimonies were delivered behind screens and names were redacted from all documents. All documents except one. A single affidavit that had mistakenly crossed her desk. A document she should never have accessed. A document with a signature she had committed to memory, knowing she would never reference it. Thomas Blackwell. It wasn't merely a name. It was an operation designation, a code word for a mission that officially had never occurred. Her thoughts raced through possibilities. Coincidence? Stolen identity? Or could it actually be him? The same individual whose testimony she had transcribed in a secure, compartmented information facility, whose words had immediately received above top-secret classification. She murmured something so quietly that only the bailiff standing beside the bench could discern. "It can't possibly be him." The bailiff leaned closer. "Judge, is everything all right?" She offered no response. Instead, she examined the man before her. Beneath the beard and gaunt features, could it be the same face? The eyes? Yes, the eyes were identical. That specific shade of blue that had seemed so incongruous with the horrors he had recounted in that other courtroom years ago. The public defender shifted uncomfortably during the silence that had persisted too long. "Your Honor, shall we continue with the charges?" But Judge Marquez wasn't listening. Her mind had traveled 15 years backward, recalling fragments of testimony about extraction operations in territories where American forces officially had never entered. About decisions made when all options were impossible choices, about sacrifices that could never be acknowledged. She remembered the voice, the sworn oath, the way he had maintained perfect posture despite the restraints. Thomas Blackwell wasn't merely a man facing minor charges on a Monday morning. He was a phantom, a systems failure, a mission his country had forsaken. "Your Honor," the prosecutor prompted, puzzled by the delay. But Judge Marquez had already reached her conclusion. Judge Victoria Marquez removed her reading glasses with meticulous care. The thin metal frames caught the fluorescent light as she folded them and placed them precisely beside her gavel. Her hands, the court reporter noticed, were trembling slightly. She interlaced her fingers on the bench, gripping so tightly the knuckles whitened. For an extended moment, she simply observed the man who identified himself as Thomas Blackwell, studying him, perceiving beyond the layers of worn clothing and hardship to something beneath. "Mr. Blackwell," she finally said, her tone transformed. Not the efficient, somewhat detached voice of a judge processing cases, but something more human, more troubled. "I'm dismissing these charges." A murmur spread through the courtroom. The prosecutor straightened, confused. The public defender blinked repeatedly, wondering if he'd misunderstood. The man Blackwell tilted his head slightly, asking just one word. "Why?" That singular syllable conveyed no gratitude, no relief, just genuine bewilderment, as if mercy was more suspicious than punishment. Judge Marquez's response came softly but distinctly, reaching every corner of the suddenly silent room. Because I have no right to sit behind this bench while you stand before it, she rose, an unusual action during ongoing proceedings. The movement was abrupt enough that the bailiff took an instinctive step forward, uncertain if something was amiss. Your Honor, the prosecutor began, partially rising from his seat. Judge Marquez addressed her clerk. Remove these charges from the record. Delete everything related to this case immediately. The prosecutor found both his voice and his footing. Judge Marquez, with all due respect, this is highly unusual. The defendant has multiple warnings for the same violation. There are established protocols. She silenced him with a gesture more military than judicial. Definitive. Final. Do you understand who he is, counselor? A transient with repeated violations of Municipal Code 15.3, the prosecutor replied, indicating his case notes. Incorrect. The word cracked like a gavel, though she hadn't touched the wooden instrument. She pointed directly at Blackwell, who remained seated, his expression unreadable beneath the beard. This man conducted covert search and extraction operations behind enemy lines in 2004. He sacrificed half his team so we could evacuate an embassy that was never officially under threat. And he signed a non-disclosure agreement that remains in effect until 2085. The silence in the courtroom deepened. Even the constant hum of the heating system seemed to fade, and the prosecutor's confidence wavered. How could you possibly have knowledge of that? Judge Marquez reached down to her briefcase, not the official one containing the day's dockets, but her personal one. With steady hands now, she withdrew a slim black folder, the only physical reminder she had ever retained from her early clerkship. Not the contents, those remained secured in a facility somewhere in Virginia, but the folder itself with its distinctive marking in the corner. Because I was present, she said quietly, when he provided testimony in a room, we had to inspect for surveillance devices 3 times daily. I was there when he described actions that saved 37 American lives while wearing restraints because the mission itself was disavowed. She placed the empty folder on the bench, a symbol only she and Blackwell would comprehend. This man has been betrayed by the very system he protected, and I refuse to become another link in that chain of betrayal. The prosecutor had no response. The public defender regarded his client with fresh perspective, truly seeing him for the first time. Thomas Blackwell stood slowly, his posture altered and his hunched shoulders straightening. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable, like watching someone step back into a uniform they hadn't worn in years. I didn't come seeking favors, Judge, he said, his voice carrying authority despite his appearance. And you're not receiving one, she replied without hesitation. You're receiving overdue respect, and I'm giving this court the opportunity to do what's right for once. With that, she descended from the bench, not toward her chambers at the side, but directly ahead, walking past the attorney's tables toward the main exit of the courtroom. She paused briefly beside Blackwell. Words were exchanged that no one else could hear. Then she continued walking, pushing through the double doors without glancing back. For several moments, no one moved. The court machinery, so accustomed to its relentless forward momentum, had completely halted. Then the bailiff, a 20-year veteran of the sheriff's department, stood at attention. The court reporter followed, rising to her feet. One by one, everyone in the courtroom stood, a silent acknowledgement that transcended legal procedure, rank, or position. Everyone stood for the one who had stood for them when it truly mattered. Thomas Blackwell exited the courthouse into the bright winter morning. The sunlight was harsh against his eyes after the filtered illumination of the courtroom. He squinted slightly, adjusting the worn cap on his head. A habit from years when distinctive features could determine survival or death. The street bustled with typical Monday activity. Office workers hurried past with coffee cups. Vehicles competed for position at the intersection. No one paid attention to another homeless man leaving the halls of justice. Whether through freedom or further condemnation made little difference to the passing world. But a vehicle waited, black, unmarked, windows tinted just enough to obscure the occupants without attracting undue attention. It had been parked there for exactly 17 minutes. As Blackwell descended the courthouse steps, the rear passenger door opened. A man in a dark blue uniform emerged, No visible insignia, no identification tag, but his bearing was unmistakable. Military through and through. "Sir," he said simply, his voice quiet, "it's time." Blackwell halted, his weathered features revealing nothing. "Time for what?" "For you to stop vanishing." The uniformed man's tone was respectful but firm. "We've been searching for you for 3 years since the Algeria incident." A flicker of something crossed Blackwell's face. Recognition, perhaps, or fatigue. "We've established a location," the man continued. "Secluded, private. You won't be disturbed there, but we require your expertise one final time." My answer remains negative. "Sir, with respect, circumstances have evolved. The events of '04 have been reevaluated at the highest levels." Blackwell stood motionless, considering invisible options, assessing risks as he had done in mountains and deserts and jungles, where incorrect choices meant unmarked graves. Finally, he nodded once. Decision made. He entered the vehicle without further comment. The door closed. The car merged into traffic and disappeared. Another ghost returning to the shadows where some of the nation's most crucial work occurs. Back in the courthouse an hour after her unprecedented exit, Judge Victoria Marquez returned to Courtroom 3. The docket had been reassigned. The room stood empty now. She carried her judicial robe carefully folded over her arm. With deliberate steps, she walked to the clerk's office and placed an envelope on the desk. Inside was her formal resignation, effective immediately. "May I ask why, Your Honor?" the clerk inquired, genuinely distressed. Judge Marquez had been respected, efficient, fair. She offered a small smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Because justice can be served in different ways." I was reminded of that today. The court remained perplexed. Rumors circulated as they inevitably do. Theories about mental breakdowns, ethical violations, undisclosed illnesses. None approached the truth. But later that week, maintenance personnel installed a new plaque in the courthouse hallway. No ceremony accompanied it. No explanation was provided. It simply appeared, brass letters reflecting the morning light. "To those who served where records do not follow and still carry what history refuses to document." Some claim Judge Marquez had commissioned it before departing. Others suggested it came directly from the governor's office. A few insisted they witnessed a uniformed man overseeing its installation during pre-dawn hours. The truth, like many things in a world of shadows and service, remained classified. But the plaque endured, a testament to silent sacrifices, to debts that can never be publicly acknowledged, to heroes who request nothing, not even remembrance. Because certain stories are inscribed not in records or medals or headlines, but in the quiet spaces between heartbeats of a nation that sleeps securely unaware of its guardians. Share if you agree that some heroes never cease serving.